now want to introduce you to Daniel Rock, who is a professor at Wharton. We're all colleagues in academia. And I've followed Daniel's work with great interest because he's partnered with OpenAI to do an actual study on the potential impact of general purpose technologies, large language models on the on the workforce and how we should think about that. And it's an absolutely fascinating piece of research. When I read it, I immediately reached out to Daniel and said, you have to speak here. Luckily for me, he said yes. With that, Daniel, take it away.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me out. So this project is called GPTs or GPTs. That is Generative Pre-trained Transformers or General Purpose Technologies. And we did a lot of work to shoehorn the results into the title. So you're going to have to bear with me. So this is joint work with colleagues at OpenAI and Open Research. So Tina Alundu and Pamela Mishkin at OpenAI and Sam Manning at Open Research, which was formerly Y Combinator Research. All right, so let me cut to the chase and just tell you what we found very quickly. Generative AI will be transformative, and it's going to require a plan. Why is that? Well, about 80% of workers have at least 10% of their tasks exposed to generative AI. When I say exposed, I don't mean you're going to be able to automate what they're doing. You might be able to automate some of it, or you can maybe augment what people are doing. When we say exposed, it's neither good nor bad, but things are definitely going to have to change. So as managers, a core challenge over the coming decades is going to be how do you change your organization, thinking about what, like Marcello was saying, how do you change your organization so that the technology matches the business technology, right? So going along with this exposure idea, though, there's exposed to, say, just large language models, and then there's exposed if we say, yes, we're going to build around large language models as well. So it's not just the AI, it's the AI plus additional software, additional organizational investments. That's how you're going to unlock the real value. OK, so we're going to say that a general purpose technology as a category is something really interesting. Vijay mentioned this earlier today, but a general purpose technology has pervasive impact, it improves over time, and then it spawns and necessitates complementary innovation as that process continues, particularly within the R&D space. So the types of things that generative AI mostly does are information processing, and that's maybe why there's a little bit of anxiety going on in the economy right now, because a lot of what we do, if you've gone to school for too long, like some of us have, is information processing fundamentally. All right, so this IT-based job displacement argument obviously isn't new. We've had this with the internet, with personal computing, even with mobile, big data, that sort of stuff. And the last few decades have really been a story about moving away from routine cognitive tasks, or even routine manual tasks in some cases, towards non-routine cognitive tasks, complicated information processing. And one of the obstacles there, right, is, for traditional IT, we have to be able to specify a recipe. Here's the input, here are the steps, and then you get the output. Now with AI, a lot of what you can do is overcome what's called Polanyi's paradox, where we know more than we can tell, right? Like you can't really tell me how you recognize your parents, but you can do it very quickly. Now software can do that too, because we can specify input and output and learn the map automatically. That's for supervised learning. Generative AI is kind of a different beast, but pretty interesting along similar dimensions. And if you ask computer scientists about this, you have to separate out, OK, what's different this time for IT versus generative AI? You ask computer scientists, they'll tell you, well, let me get out of the way here, full automation of all labor is somewhere between 50 and 200 years away or never. Now, I'm a cranky economist. I'm going to say I don't think full automation of labor is coming anytime soon. I don't think the horse equilibrium is coming for people. But it's possible that this latest wave of AI as a general purpose technology is the most G of all GPTs. Okay. Why do we think that might be happening? Well, let's look at the exponential curves, because that's basically where you end up. 2014, we've got pictures like this being generated by variational autoencoders, lots of compute. And you see that and you're like, wow, that's remarkable. A computer made a credible image of a face. Now we're over here, and it's like photorealistic, super high quality. Nobody's impressed by it anymore. So just, we're kind of like a frog slowly boiling, where we're like, oh yeah, that's not that cool. But like a decade ago, this is absolutely remarkable kind of progress. Now, it's not this kind of stark difference, right? There's two things that have changed. One, of course, is the model scale. There are more parameters in GPT-4 than GPT-3. It's not as far as I know, it's not like that much bigger, but it's a fun slide. But scale isn't where most of the gains are coming from lately. What's really new here is taste. With large language models or even image models, whatever it happens to be, one of the reasons we get these hallucinations, as they're called, is the model is trying to make us happy. Why is it trying to do that? Well, these models can generate thousands of responses to the same prompt. Depends how much uncertainty you want to add into the model. And what's really new here is that the models know which response we want to see. And we get that through a process you may have heard of called reinforcement learning with human feedback. It could be AI feedback. The important part in that RLHF acronym is the F, the feedback part, where we build a model of what's going to be good versus what's going to be bad as an output. And that means that all sorts of cool things can be built. So that taste, that's the new thing, okay? All right, so I'm not going to talk a ton about improvement over time after this, but I do want to put this up here just to give you a sense of the scale. So after ChatGPT came out, which is really just a UX change over what was around, you had absolutely explosive open source development, okay? So, this is one of those situations where you don't really need econometrics, like the stuff just goes up and to the right immediately, but right there at the end, these are, in blue, we've got the large language model, repos on GitHub, and we're looking at how many forks, which is a measure of how much people are collaborating on those repos. Comparing data science to large language models, it's not really comparable. Immediately, it's like you pointed all of Silicon Valley at generative AI at once. And to give you an idea of the scale here, it's about 3 to 4 times bigger than the amount of development that happened in data science when everybody went home at first for COVID. This is absolutely huge. So tons of interest, tons of development, tons of input. Now we're going to have to check and see, is this a general purpose technology? Now, why is that interesting? Well, it means, number one, we can't say a ton about jobs. Okay, supply and demand are going to move around. These, press arguments, basically, that all the jobs are going away, far too premature. If we can show that they're pervasive, we can tell they're improving over time, and the complementary innovation piece is going to be there. All right, so if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out when people talk about AI taking away all the jobs. Okay, so my colleagues and I are going to ask, basically one set of simple questions about every task that people do in the economy. And that set of tasks is curated by the US government. So there's about 20,000 of them. The database is called ONET. And for each one of these, we're going to evaluate it with both humans and with GPT-4, and we're going to ask the question, could you double your productivity with no noticeable drop in quality if you use generative AI or particular large language models? And there's 3 answers to that. One is no, so flipping burgers, at least for now, like pretty much safe from generative AI, unless you want to eat a digital burger. Then the other answer is yes, for sure you could do that. So writing an email takes much less than half the amount of time that it would have taken before. And then there's yes, but, or yes and if you're an improv fan. The yes and here is I could, but I need additional systems to get into that. All right, so I need to build other software. I need to integrate it into my systems. It's not super easy right off the bat thing. So the no-brainer thing to do is, yes, have your employees and your teams experiment with using ChatGPT, see if you can get some quick wins. But there are some places where you're going to need to go much deeper, pursue that digital transformation. All right, so we've got our 3 categories, E0, no exposure, E1, yes, there's exposure, and E2, yes, and we have other systems. Okay, so what do we find were the most exposed roles? It's an interesting mix. At the top of the list are a lot of information processing analytical roles, jobs like mathematician. People are like, oh yeah, it's terrible at math. These guys can't be right. Well, by the end of the week, the Wolfram Alpha plugin had come out, and mathematicians were using it to write proofs, in collaboration with the software. And we said, yeah, we kind of had a sense that might happen. But also things like proofreading, copy editing, translation, as we saw Vijay speaking perfect Spanish yesterday. I would have liked to see the English version of that too to make sure that the translation worked perfectly. A lot of clerical roles, and then physicists and data scientists and all those different tech workers. And we'll come back to that. The exposure here clearly is hiding something. There's different types of impact that we can have. So before we do that, though, let's look at how it operates over different wages and employment counts. So this is on the x-axis on top, we've got total employment. On the y-axis, we've got exposure as either rated by GPT-4 or humans, and humans and GPT-4 tend to agree. In fact, GPT-4 is a little bit more conservative sometimes. Sometimes I think it's lying because it doesn't want to do that work. You know, who knows? We'll see. But on the bottom, we've got wages on the x-axis. So you can see that for both the humans and GPT-4, the higher the wage, the higher the exposure level. So that's really disruptive if you think about, you know, all that time and effort people have sunk into human capital, that things are going to change. It's not necessarily bad, though, because we could also see these people being turbocharged. So, you know, thinking about distributional consequences longer term, within job, it seems like this lowers barriers, but between jobs, you know, your best software engineers might run away from your, you know, clerical workers, that sort of thing. In terms of total employment, it doesn't seem very highly correlated. You know, bigger jobs, smaller jobs, all sort of similarly exposed. Okay, so it's pervasive. It's affecting a lot of different types of roles. Let's talk as well about whether we're going to need additional innovation to unlock those gains. So one of the ways we can compare that, we can say, okay, well, let's compare our measure of yes and to our measure of yes on its own. And as we get more permissive with what's exposed, do we see broader based, more pervasive exposure? Like, are we going to need, are there a lot of things in that yes and category? And you can see, yeah, so for, you know, a, say 20% threshold of what percentage of what you're doing, you know, being exposed, for 20%, you know, about, on just the yes, we're exposed to begin with, 20% of your tasks exposed, about 20% of occupations have 20% of their tasks just exposed to large language models. No additional stuff. But if you say, take that 20% number and then include the yes and category, you get up to about 60%. So a lot of people are exposed very quickly if you start to assume that those additional systems are going to be built. So yeah, large language models are going to require and generate complementary innovation on the basis of this. Okay, so I've kind of punted on a question I'm sure many of you are wondering about, which is, what about automation? Well, first thing to notice is that automation and exposure are highly correlated. So this discussion we have of should we augment or should we automate, if this comes from outside the system, it's exogenous in some sense, we don't really get to pick. We're going to be doing both. Okay, so you're going to automate some tasks so that you can divert effort into augmented other tasks where people can improve their productivity. And the stuff that's automatable, now the scientists are gone from the list. It's switchboard operators, telemarketers, a ton of clerical roles, assistants. The things we've already seen GPT start to replace, those gains have been very, very quick. But the overall exposure and the automation stuff is highly correlated within jobs. So you can say to your workers, like, let's not forget that workers have a ton of agency and they're a big part of how we implement this stuff. You can say to your workers, hey, you know, use this to get rid of things you don't like doing and focus on the stuff you do like doing, and you're going to be much more effective in terms of deploying the technology. All right, so I'm going to end on sort of an optimistic note here. What we did for this plot is we took all of the different jobs in the economy, and then we looked at the tasks that they shared. Okay, and then we built clusters out of that. Some types of jobs share similar types of tasks. And it actually separates out pretty cleanly. So on the bottom, we've got all the medical stuff. Then we've got machinists and sort of the trades on the left-hand side. They're close together, so that's encouraging too. Similar work. And on the right here, we've got scientists and researchers, architects, engineers, and tech workers. Now, what I'm not showing you is where that exposure lies in this network. And it turns out that it's all in scientists, researchers, and tech workers. That's where the highest lit up areas for exposure are. So when we think about what's a general purpose technology or what's going to change in our society, one of the definitional improvements that we're looking for is that science and development get turbocharged. But our ability to discover new facts about the world and deploying them, that's the stuff where this tool can be most helpful. So it's a bus to the frontier. And it turns out that that's the case for generative AI. It wasn't the case necessarily for standard machine learning. In fact, the least, you know, the lowest wage jobs are more exposed to that in earlier work we did. So This is very exciting. That suggests that generative AI is going to be a key catalyst for driving all sorts of productivity growth and productivity improvements if we can figure out the organizational complements to go with it. So, some takeaways here. We know that GPTs are GPTs. That means we're going to see and need a lot of complementary innovation, and it's very difficult to know right now where are all the jobs going, because the jobs are all going to change. And that's been the story with older types of technology. It was the story with older versions of compute and the internet. We have not seen this story before, but we've seen this type of story before. So it's nothing to worry about necessarily. We don't have to worry about all the jobs going away. Not to say some people won't be displaced, but we can design good policies for that. And then as you start to think about what's good for your workforce, well, it's helpful to start doing some cheap experiments now, but start thinking as well, what are the big modules in your organization that can be transformed or changed using this sort of technology? Where can you pull information from unstructured data, which is something like, I heard someone say 80% of all data is unstructured. That's unlocking an entirely new type of software and a new set of insights. And sometimes those data will point the same direction as your unstructured data. So if you want to think about jobs, start thinking about tasks instead to start with. Where can I get some quick wins? And then as those things start to accumulate, now we can start thinking about new systems. Where's the best way to implement a transformational change that unlocks a new type of productivity within the organization? So, and then just to close up, what we didn't find is that AI is coming for all the jobs. So if you hear people saying that, push back a little bit. Say, I don't think the market has yielded any information that's the case. Now, I'm willing to be proven wrong. Maybe some sort of transformational new thing comes out next week, because that seems to happen in AI, but at least as of the last few months, no evidence of that happening. So thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to talking with all of you about this.